Every once in a while, you get a tool that kind of changes the industry a bit. That's right, we're back in Decent Sampler. So, it's been about a year since I last covered this. It showed up on the channel where it's relevant, but I haven't really dug into what's going on in the world of Decent Sampler in a while. So, a quick recap of the last video. Piano Book was started to be a community for producers, composers, and sample makers to kind of work together and share libraries and get more sounds without having to pay too much. Bit of a community effort. Now the problem was that Kontakt is expensive and not everybody owns Logic. And Sforzando is a little more complicated and kind of not quite standardized, and so, it's a little messy, maybe it's not going to work the same for everybody. So, our hero, Dave Hilowitz, came along and created Decent Sampler, which is kind of an alternative to Kontakt in some ways, although arguably you could say it's more of a refined and standardized kind of alternative to Sforzando. So in that year, Piano Book is still going. It's been a little bit of a shakeup in management. There's a lot of new sample libraries, and they also now have the Artist Series, which are paid-for sample libraries. Don't worry, it's not moving away from the free libraries or the community. And also the Artist Series, the paid ones, are from the community, and it's kind of Piano Book giving the people in the community a chance on occasion to actually make their own libraries and sell them in a place that's visible to the broader community. So it's still actually a really cool opportunity for people like myself, although I don't have an artist library personally, to actually be able to use Piano Book as a platform to be seen and get out there, as well as for plenty of people to just create cool little fun things that they like popping bubble wrap. Kontakt is still expensive, that has not changed. And Dave Hilowitz is still our hero. Decent Sampler has not gone anywhere. It has been improving more and more. In fact, in the time between the last time I tried recording this video and now, I've learned that there's even convolution reverb which has been added. I've not played around with that one yet, so I'm not going to have that in any of the examples when I start digging into what has changed. But I figured we might as well see what has been changed in the time since I last made a video on this. So I've opened up a modified version of a recent instrument I made, Tongues Mini, just a kind of light version of a tongue drum instrument I've made. If you've seen the last video or are familiar with Decent Sampler already, you'll notice that the knobs here are not the standard Decent Sampler UI. And that's because one of the things that's been added has been custom UI elements. So I can add my own knobs in here now. You can also add additional image elements and background elements that you can use to kind of shape your user interface, which is really cool. I'm already starting to see some more advanced library layouts coming out now that people can kind of put their own knobs and stuff in it. It uses the standard Knobman format, which you can get off of Knobman's website, or you can make your own on their website. It's pretty much the same as Kontakt. In fact, these are the same ones I use in the Kontakt instruments. You can also make them using other programs. There's somebody in the community on Piano Book I saw who's actually using Blender to make knobs and UI elements. Another thing you'll notice is the drop-down menu. They added that a little bit back, but that is another recent addition. In the case of this instrument, I have it as just an on-off switch because they're not buttons yet. So if I turn these up, you can kind of hear the close mic and the reverb. Try not to fat finger the keys a bit. I am not a piano player. Let's say I turn down the close mic. All you have is the reverb now. Turn that off and you can see the keys lighting up. There's no sound. That's a pretty straightforward way of just sort of muting on-offing your channels. That can be very useful for a lot of things. You can also use it to change different mic collections or a number of other things. In fact, with the Convolution Reverb edition, you can also use it to change which IR you're using. So if you go into the File menu, go down to the Developers Tools, you can see that you can load now EXS and SFZ files, so Sforzando and the Logic Sampler. So if you're building with those, you can actually load those in and use those to build the rest of your instrument off of. And you now also have this preset editor, which is really cool. Now, This is still very, very, very much in beta. There's a lot of things that don't work about it yet. You cannot rename the groups. You cannot rename the samples. If you go in here and actually look at the sample list, you can change the root note, but you can't really change any of the other information here. There's a lot of stuff that's not complete. If you drag your samples in, you won't be able to, as you can in Kontakt or in EXS, where you can basically drag it over a single key and it'll assign those samples to that key and auto map the velocity. It doesn't do any of that. It'll just spread them across the whole range, all the way around, the whole piano range and the whole velocity range, all the samples, and you have to actually edit those in the script still. Though there are useful things you can still do in here. You can assign the groups if you want to actually build an instrument and not have to waste time scripting those. You'll still have to do editing to them, but you can at least add them in here and then fix them up in the script. Another thing that's really handy for me, and I'll get into that later as well, is that you can open the editor, select all your samples, and you can change the looping mode here to one shot. And it doesn't matter how long you press the keys, they're just going to cycle through to the end of the sample. And that's great for percussion and stuff like this. That is what I intended for the tongue drum or for Turnigan, which is one of the older instruments, the ones I brought up in the previous video on this. And the way I used to have to do that was basically to just change the release to be really, really long so that it would ring out either way. Another thing you have here is the browser. And you can go in here, there's a lot more free instruments and a few other paid ones from other developers. There's a lot of stuff from Dave, there's also stuff from like Venus Theory and such. So if you want to support Decent Sampler, as far as I know, it's still just Dave doing this. You can go through into this browser and you can purchase some of the libraries that are actually available, and that really helps to keep this whole thing going. It'd be really cool to be able to actually get a kind of a team behind this, get some of these features added in a little faster, be able to actually support this, because honestly, this is a game changer. I still stand by that from the last video and will continue to. We need something that is universally available, standardized, and can work much the same way as Kontakt. Things I would personally like to see added, I'd like to see buttons added to the interface. The user interface right now mostly just has the sliders and the drop-down menus and stuff. Another thing would be an engine parameter that solos groups. I think that that would be really handy, or maybe even solos tags. In fact, not going to say maybe, definitely solos tags or groups. I think it'd be very handy, and that's actually something in Kontakt that's a huge pain to work with. I think that being able to target a solo group or tag option would make my life 1,000 times easier, and would honestly put Decent Sampler just that tad bit above Kontakt in one place. I think obviously the sample editor in the developer tools, I think that that can be expanded. I don't think there's any plans not to. I mean, I suspect all these things are coming. These are just things that I personally think would be really cool to see in here. So right now I have Sublime Text open, and this has the DS preset, which is basically the script file and really just kind of the instrument file in general for Decent Sampler. I mean, the most basic Decent Sampler file is basically just going to be the DS preset and the sample folder. So I figured I'd actually pull it open and talk a little bit about how these things are formatted and made. So if you're familiar with HTML, if you've ever built a website or played around with just embedding like a YouTube video on something or whatever, then you're going to have a pretty decent understanding of how this is laid out. Basically, you have these kind of brackets, you have these blocks that represent the different parts of the code. And within each of them, you have all the different pieces of the instrument that you want the program to actually read. And it's laid out very simply and in the same kind of way as HTML. So the blocks are in the brackets here. You have Decent Sampler, that's the beginning of the instrument. And that basically tells it start reading here. And then you close that at the bottom with the same thing, just / Decent Sampler. Kind of in the same way with HTML, if you're doing like YT/YT or something like that. And then from there, you can kind of put them in whatever order you want. I like to put the UI at top. A lot of the ones I've gotten from Piano Book actually have the UI at the bottom. But that's kind of the wonderful thing about the way it's broken up, is that you have the groups, you have the user interface, and you have effects and stuff like that that you can assign into these sub blocks. So in this one I have the UI, that's my next one, and that has the background image, and it tells you where to find it and how wide it is and how tall it is and what the alignment is. And then you have the tab. Right now you can only have one tab, but the tab is basically the actual interface. It sounds like there's plans possibly to do multiple tabs in the future, but for now this is going to be all the space you have, whatever you assign. So the tab is basically sort of a subcategory of the user interface. The tab is going to have these two knobs here and this drop-down menu in my case, as well as the labels on the knobs. The cool thing about these kind of pieces here, like the label knobs and everything, is that you can more or less assign its attributes in whatever order you want. So you can put the XY first, you can put the width and height first, you can define the color first. It's really kind of up to you and your workflow, and I really like that because I feel like having your own workflow can really change it for every person who's doing their own. We're looking currently at the tongues mini preset you have on the left of the screen. We'll look here, we have two knobs in this area here. You also have two labels. I put the labels above the knobs. So the label just has its XY coordinates, it has its width, it has its height. I have the color of the text, I have the size of the text, and I have what the text itself actually says. And the control, the reason it is a control, not a labeled knob, is for the custom skin, the custom UI. And in this case, I have the name of the knob, I have its location, I have its type, I have its color. Some of these are actually not going to apply once you put the custom UI onto it, but because the custom UI is being bound to a standard knob, I'm still going to put in some of the parameters that would be on the standard knob. So for the style, I have the custom skin, I have the custom image location, I have the number of frames in the animation, which is 91, I have the orientation, and I have the mouse behavior. And then down here I have the binding, and that just tells it what that knob is controlling. In this case, it is a tag level, and it is controlling every group that is tagged with the close mic. And then it is bound to the amp volume, which is the volume, basically. Pretty self-explanatory in this case. And then down here, /control closes out this control block. Down here I have a menu. This is a group-based menu. This menu basically just turns on and off the reverb mic, so you can quick switch between them. I don't have that in the actual instrument, but if you want to add that to the actual instrument, you can just copy this whole line of text here. It's all very straightforward. Once again, you have its location, you have its width, you have its length, you have the value, and you can have a placeholder text. The groups in this are zero-based. A lot of things in this instrument are, basically meaning that if you're trying to count the groups, group 1 is going to show up in the instrument as group 0. And that is important here because I'm trying to target the third and fourth group, which are group 2 and 3. So that is one thing to be mindful of if you're writing script or working with Decent Sampler. It's the same as Kontakt in that way. So in the menu block, you have an option block, and in that you have bindings. This one has 2 bindings, and it's really just 1 binding per group. And because this is on, that's the name of it. This is the enabled groups, and enabled groups is false down here with the off. It's basically identical except that it is called off and that the parameter is false. And then you close that up with option, and then you close that up with /menu. And I'm sorry that the spacing is really kind of whacked out here. I never really put time into actually spacing it properly. Now, if it's your intention to build a Decent Sampler instrument, there's a few ways you can do it. So the first things first, you're going to want to actually organize your samples. Now, if you have Logic Sampler, you can just create a Logic Sample instrument and then open that into Decent Sampler, save that, and that'll route all of your samples. That'll tell you the velocity layers and the root notes and everything. That'll save you a lot of headache. If you have Kontakt, then you'll want to drag the instrument into Kontakt, open up Creator Tools. This is with Kontakt 6 and on. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with 5. There is a Kontakt to Decent Sampler script that Dave has made for Creator Tools. Once your instrument here shows up in Creator Tools, you'll see here I've got 4 groups. That's 2 close mics, 2 reverbs. You want to drag that script in to the Lua script. Go over to that tab, drag that in, just press play, and that's going to go through and it's going to make the actual DS preset at least for the routing of the samples and the grouping of them. So you go in here, Command-Option-C, that'll copy it. Come into Sublime Text, just paste that. Gonna get rid of that little ready note at the bottom. You don't need that. And come up to the top. You got this little line here, the decent sampler to Kontakt. You don't need that. You can leave that in if you want. It's kind of just a little advertisement of how it's done. And you'll see that it is laid out quite cleanly. But the big thing is it's only going to include the very most essential parts. First things first, I'm going to go up here. I'm going to turn off the wrap text because it makes it a lot easier to just kind of go through, and I'll show you a trick for that too, which makes it really handy. Round Robin 1, that's your first group, or RR1, RR2, and there's going to be RV1 and RV2. Those are the reverb round robins. You'll see that I've added the round robin voicing. You'll see that I've added the release. That's actually not necessary anymore. And then the sequence position for the round robin. And you also have this tag. So C is the tag for the close mics, and so the first two groups have that tag. So you could realistically add all that in. You just type it up. So it'd be like tags equals C. And another thing that you can do here is if you go into the find, if you use group name there, for example, that'll only pull up the group. You'll see there's 4 matches, there's 4 groups. And then if you hit the find, it'll actually just scroll through those 4 groups. That's a quick way to jump between them. You can also do find and replace. That can help with voicing a lot of things very quickly. But realistically speaking, if you want to be like adding a user interface, if you want to be telling it how to voice your groups, the fastest way to do it really is going to be to find and replace using some kind of preset or template you have. Templates are going to save you a lot of time. So this is just kind of a quick example template that I have. I'm not going to share this one because A, it's kind of a mess, B, it doesn't have a lot in it, C, I kind of made it just to show you what you could have in a template or how you could lay it out. Everyone's workflow is going to be a little different, so everyone's desired template is going to look a little different. And on top of that, what you're building is going to kind of determine what actually gets included, like what specific things. So I mean, I have like really basic stuff like a label or a knob or a drop-down menu. So I have like the group-based menu down here. But you come down here, you have like a drum channel template. You know, so you're like, what are the things I'm going to include in a drum channel? I can create a single template and just paste that through for everyone and just change the parameters that need changing. And this is another reason I'm not sharing this one, is because ideally you put into the parameters you want to change, like the label, you would put in some nonsense word that's never going to show up anywhere else in the script. You're going to find and replace every instance of that when you paste it in. So you paste in the first one, you'll find and replace that with whatever that channel is going to be. Now, part of the reason I bring that up is that, let's say, for example, you don't have Logic, you don't have Kontakt. See, I mentioned earlier, Kontakt Logic, they're expensive. Not everyone's going to have them. That kind of makes it harder to work in Decent Sampler. And because the builder is kind of in beta and doesn't quite work yet, you still got to do a lot of this stuff in the script, and that's going to slow people down. So there's some developer tools that are still kind of inaccessible to people who don't have the money. But that doesn't mean that you can't still quickly and easily build your own instrument. Not only will the template actually make it a lot faster to do a lot of the basic stuff, but if you're building your own instrument, you're working with high counts of samples, like I often do, then one thing you can do in the creation process is to plan how many velocity layers you're going to have, how many round robin groups you're going to have. You can template out the groups and the round robins before you've even created the samples, and you can create sort of a template for the samples that is based on the layers. So I'm going to make a quick example. It's just going to be one group, but I have here an 11 layer velocity sort of preset in the template. And I'll show you how that works in a sec. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just create the header. So you have the XML declaration that tells that kind of tells it how to read. And you have the declaration of the Decent Sampler block. I'm not 100% sure if block is actually the correct term for that. I am not a programmer. But the fact that this is easy for somebody like me who is not a programmer really does say a lot for how simple this can actually be to make. And hopefully this video helps, and if it doesn't, Dave actually has a lot of really good videos on his channel. The Decent Sampler community has a help channel on the Piano Book Discord, and I've gotten a lot of help from there. In fact, there's a little script in the actual template there that I had for the drum channel that was a tags-based menu, and I did not know how to do that until I checked the community. Somebody else had done it and was trying to get help on it, and I managed to basically steal their script and go, that's how that works. So it's also really good for learning that stuff. So /decent sampler, that'll close it up. And then everything's going to go in between those. So for this one, we're not building a UI. In this case, we could, if we wanted to, we could even just copy the stupid UI from Tongues Mini. It wouldn't work because the groups that it would be targeting don't exist, but it would physically appear. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go into the basics. The UI is something that you have to do in the script even if you are using Kontakt or one of the other builders as your kind of developer tool. So that's not something that's going to change. I'm going to cover actually putting the samples together. So first things first, we're going to go down. We're going to create our groups. So I'm going to copy that part of the template. We're going to paste that. So here you have this groups block, and then within the groups block, you just have this first group block. That's where our samples are going to go. We're going to put the tag snare top. We're going to pretend that there would be more of these laters. This is because this is going to be built from a snare top sample set. Round robin, sequence position 1, that's already correct. So we're going to go down here, underneath this, and we're going to add the samples. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to go in, and I'm going to copy them over. So this is the sample folder. There's 11 samples in here. These are all snare top mics. These actually come from Turnigan, the instrument that I built in the last one, or played around with in the last one. Copy those. You're going to paste them, and it's going to paste them onto their own lines. Now here's a really cool trick with Sublime Text, which is also why I and a lot of other people use it here. It's just very simple, and it's also basically free. So we're going to line those up, and I don't know what the command is on PC. I imagine it's probably some version of the same thing. But if you hold down Control and Shift, and then just use the arrow key here, you've now basically created a big long cursor. Now everything you type is going to be on all 11 of those lines. And this is handy for the template. So we're going to come down here. This sample path is identical for every line, so you only need it once, and you just paste it across all of those. You have the sample names, but you still need to tell it where it's going. The name of the folder is samples test, / that's going to give you the path. Once again, that's the same across all of them, so you just type that in. You could copy that in if you wanted. Again, if you are building one from a template, you would include that in the path equals part of the template. Now if we come in, these 11 lines here for the template, these are all different. These are not identical. These have information on the velocity that is going to tell each sample what its range is. We're going to paste that in, and notice that it actually pastes each of the individual lines. It's not the same line 11 times, it's not all 11 lines 11 times at the end of the samples. It is all pasted there very nicely as is, and this is where the template really helps you out. But it's not quite ready yet. So first things first, you're going to want to define your root note. we're just gonna say 71. Start is at 0. The end, we're gonna put that at like 10,000. That's gonna basically, that's measured in samples. So it's very, very big numbers if you want to get it out there, but that should cover the whole thing. I don't think any of these samples end after 10,000 samples. These don't really have a note range, so the low and high notes are going to be the same as the root note. And there you go, that should be the basics. I'm gonna tab that out. And then we just got to close it off. So first is going to be /group. That's going to cover that group block. And then if you were making another group, you would start a new group. But in this case, it's just one. And so that's going to close off /groups. And you should have an instrument. So we're going to save that. I'm just going to call it test DS. And now we should be able to open it in Decent Sampler. Just drag and drop. And I'm going to leave this part in because sometimes this might happen. It's not finding the samples. So you can see it doesn't really play. There's nothing there. It doesn't know where the samples are. But we're going to use the reload feature. I'm going to go back in. And I'm going to see what's wrong. I see there's an extra space at the end. That might be it. We're going to close that off and we're just going to try it. Go back in here, go into File, Reload. Turns out that was it. Space at the end, that was it. So I'm going to leave that part in because sometimes it's just going to be messed up. You know, you're going to try it. It's not going to work, and you go, huh, why didn't that work? Why? I did everything right. And you might have to go through and go, oh, I left a space somewhere, and now it doesn't read it. But now, we have a working Decent Sampler instrument. Really basic, and you would basically just repeat that with all the mic levels, you would repeat that with all the different round robins, and you would just change each group or tag to fit accordingly. But that really is all you need to do. So thank you for watching until the end. I hope that video was helpful to you if you're looking to build any of these. Feel free to ask me. I, again, am not a programmer. I might not have the answer for you, but the Decent Sampler help channel in the Piano Book Discord community can be very helpful. That's one place I can recommend to start. You can also reach out to Dave. He's pretty accessible on Twitter, on his own channel. He's usually very helpful with that stuff in a pretty timely manner as well if you reach out to him. And like I said, he has a lot of videos. He also has a fantastic user manual that's very well written, very simple, very easy to understand, again, even for somebody who's not a programmer like me. So I recommend getting that. I'll have links to some of this stuff in the description below as well. And on that note, happy sampling.